Hey, good to see you.
Good to see you too.
It's a pleasure. So I'm really excited to have you on the show. Please share about yourself.
Sure, I'm Jay Fajardo, and I'm the Executive Director of IdeaSpace Ventures. And I have been a tech entrepreneur since maybe the mid 80s, since
Wow.
I was 15.
So what were you like when you were 15? Were you like, really, I want to be a founder one day. I see myself one day running this thing called this capital fund, which probably didn't exist
No.
back then. So what were you like as a teenager?
As a teenager, I was into a lot of tinkering already. I was into electronics, and I imagined myself maybe putting up maybe a firm that built amps, power amps maybe, or maybe speaker systems. Until one Christmas in 1983, my father bought us a small personal computer called the Sinclair ZX81, which is one of the early PCs, which only had 2K of RAM and had the cassette tape for storage. And I started learning how to code, taught myself how to program in BASIC over Christmas. A couple of months later, was proficient enough to create software that for that time was pretty competent and pretty usable for maybe enterprise. So I started imagining selling this to a software distributor in the mold of the entrepreneurs of the day. So around 1983, that's only a couple of years off from the founding of maybe Apple and Microsoft, right?
Yeah.
So that was the backdrop. Those were my inspirations. And I said, if they could do it over there, I can probably do it as well. I started peddling a software program that I did for payroll with some guidance from some older friends on how it should be built. Started peddling it to a software distributor. So I had to go back and forth, commute from school. After school, I'd go to that company, show it off, ask for feedback, bring it back home, fine tune it, until after a couple of visits, he decided yeah, it's ready. I'll buy it from you just for a flat fee. And he took it from there. That was my validation. And I decided that's what my career path would probably be from that point forward, at least in tech. So over the years, I set up consulting gigs. I started doing software projects for people like Sharp, the pocket computers. My friends and I did the basic interpreter for it. I was in charge of doing the language set. And I started consulting for other companies into the 90s, pre-internet. And then one of my clients, BusinessWorld, which is a local business publication, decided that they wanted to go into the web. That was around 1996. So we were, I think, the first news outlet that migrated to the web. I joined them as a technology director. And before that, I had some stints trying to work in corporate. Never worked out for me. I've always joined outfits that were building something new. And this was one of them. So as I joined as technology director, I also built search engines for the articles, programming in Perl, started learning JavaScript when it first came out, started learning Java when it first came out. So that's around almost the late 90s, mid to late 90s. And I just started doing work on the internet. Then the concept of internet telephony started becoming much more mature. Telcos were looking at it as a viable technology to migrate to from the circuit switch paradigm. And I worked with a company that we set up to deploy IP telephony networks across Southeast Asia. By the way, when I was still with BusinessWorld, it was so early in the internet that I traveled across Asia to the different press institutes to teach them how to file stories using email and using the internet.
Wow.
So it's really early
This new
days.
technology called
Yeah,
email.
the email.
Electronic mail,
Yeah.
probably. Not even email, right?
Yeah, it's so funny when I think about it now. But it took me around Asia teaching in Indonesia, Malaysia, Mongolia, Bangladesh, India, Nepal, all sorts of places. And that gave me the confidence to work anywhere.
Yeah.
And when I started doing the IP telephony networks, that was deployed across Southeast Asia and Asia as well. Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines, Sri Lanka. And that became my Web 1.0 stint, that like at the very end of Web 1.0, because in 2002, I founded a company called Airborne Access. I left that company because I saw this ad for a wireless access router or access point, Wi-Fi access point, that sold for about $50 to $60 in the magazine. I said, wow, that's a price point that's game changing. And I said, if I take one of these, stick it into a coffee shop, I would have created a bring your own device internet cafe.
Wow.
So I did that. I did Airborne Access in '02, tried to promote the concept of the mobile worker, convince people that you could actually use your laptops out of the office and out of the homes. It was very early. No one wanted to do that. And we deployed access points in about 700 plus locations around the country. The airport, Starbucks, Seattle's Best, and that went on until around 2008 when we fully divested to PLDT, which is the local incumbent telco.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. So you've definitely seen that early chapter of technology enter, obviously, the Philippines as well. And obviously, you've seen a lot of changes then versus now, right? Today, we had Geeks on the Beach, a big conference in Cebu. Cebu is the BPO hub, a business process outsourcing hub for Philippines and the world. There's a lot of big buzz. There's all these Filipino reports by Gobi partners with Carlo sharing about it and so on and so forth. Could you share some examples of pre versus now?
Pre, definitely. In '02, the concept of venture capital obviously was very esoteric as far as the Philippines was concerned. And we really had a hard time raising. We only were successful when PLDT took notice in 2003. And then they said, okay, we'll invest in you. They invested in 3 and then '05 and then finally in '08. It was really bleak if you use that in retrospect, considering what we're experiencing now. And we know that it's super easy now to start companies when you think about it because of the tool sets and the availability of venture capital or even angel investors. But the thing is, in '08, when I exited and I started a software company in '09, just because to get back into my roots of software development, the Philippines still did not have any kind of ecosystem to speak of. Personally, what I did was I envisioned all these San Francisco style meetups to happen. And I just did my own thing. I just sponsored drinks and curated a community of different types of folks to come into the meetup, maybe engineers, designers, business folks, even media, so that try to start some kind of community where things would come out of the meetups and then they'd go on their own and build their own projects. That's exactly what happened. Because these meetups, which we called Roof Camp at the time, gave birth to Startup Weekend. And they reached out and we did the first startup weekends around 2011, which is still early days, even for Southeast Asia. We did it first in Manila, the first day in Manila. And some people that are icons now in the ecosystem were part of them. They helped me out. They reached out from Globe Telecom. They had a division called the New Business Group. And these were people like Minette Navarrete, Dan Shason, who eventually became Quick Start Ventures. So it was really a ragtag team of like-minded folk that envisioned something that could grow. And I remember Minette telling me that now that we've got entrepreneurs by virtue of Startup Weekend, what do we need now? We need money. So they toyed around with the idea of early stage investing, both as Kickstart and with Launch Garage, which is an accelerator we did together for earlier stage companies with smaller investment size. And and I think a lot of the current ecosystem just grew from there all the way until now.
Amazing. And today, I think the community is so vibrant. Obviously, there's also diaspora as well. So I think Tina Emper is a great example, right? She was from Cebu, she traveled out, she traveled back, and now she's organizing events in the technology space. So how do you see the Filipino diaspora and like the links with America, technology, English? How do you see those flows happening and interacting with the ecosystem?
In the early days, around maybe 2013, it started to happen. You had two types of Filipinos coming back. One would be the ones that were born in the United States, raised there, worked in the tech industry and wanted to come back to the Philippines and bring it here. Then you had the Filipinos that went to the United States to study and then worked for a while and then said, we can do good in the Philippines. So there were waves of that over the years. And they just kept on coming, and they just felt like we can build or make the ecosystem rise, the tech ecosystem. So that's been happening since then, and it still continues to happen. There are generations that have studied abroad, worked in big tech companies, but they still want to come back here to start businesses or operate in the VC space. We've started to see that.
I think what's interesting is that there's so many advantages to the Philippines, right? So everybody speaks English. There's a huge IT and BPO outsourcing industry. There's a big diaspora. It's very global. And it feels like actually all the capital flow that you were mentioning, obviously it all came from America into Southeast Asia, but they all landed in Singapore and elsewhere, Indonesia, right? And not really in the Philippines. So I'm just curious, do you have any speculation or reasons why that happened?
Okay, anecdotally, it's funny because I remember the early days, because the ones that are running the firms now, Vinny Lauria, I remember him prior to him setting up Golden Gate. He visited our company, Proud Cloud, and we had a couple of beers there. It was very organic. And he said that he was headed to Singapore. And Singapore was always the go-to. It's a logical place where you'd probably set up a fund, go from there to the different Southeast Asian countries, and maybe a gateway into China as well. But even when I used to go to San Francisco, I started talking to Americans, and we start talking about the Philippine market. They'd automatically discount it. So people like Vinny, Wavemaker, who's incidentally is a Filipino, Paul's Filipino, Peng Ong and Kuyi and Peng Ong, they were the first wave that made a bet on Asia and Southeast Asia, coming from the West. But the general sentiment in the West or in the US is that we don't know the market. It's very high risk for us. We don't know how to operate there. That was the first barrier. And then, of course, they were also busy in their own space. But when you mention the size of the Philippine market to them, like we're 114 million, and we've got another segment of that market that's actually around the world, they do a double take and they can't believe it. But it's not 100% serious. Like, really? And they're intrigued, but not enough to come here. And then a few years ago, there was a lot of attention in Indonesia. And by the mere size of the market, it's huge. Everybody just thought of it as the perfect place to launch companies or to invest in and all that. But of course, we all know that Indonesia is hard. That market is hard. It's archipelago just like us, and it's like different regions and different cultural nuances. So it was easier said than done. However, while everybody was pouring money into it, unicorns have been created. There have been some pretty good activity there, but the Philippines had been affected, which is strange because of the English-speaking market. You don't have to localize, and then it's quite young, relatively young, and it's huge. It's not as huge as Indonesia's, but it's half Indonesia's. It's actually a good place to test Southeast Asian-facing consumer apps, for example, without having to go to the places where you have to localize.
I think it's not a surprise about Singapore being the hub for Southeast Asia because of its finance sector, like I said, also speaks English. And of course, everybody knows it's a small market, so it's just a place to be like the Delaware, right? It's a bit of a incorporation spot, taxation, courts, safe place to store your money. So I think it's a good place to start the hub, the finance for the VC funds. But like you say, it's interesting because when you say all these things, you're like, Indonesia is 300 million people, Philippines is about 100 plus million, but everybody in the Philippines speaks English. And even from my perspective, as somebody who's invested in several Filipino startups, as well as Indonesian companies, as an angel, as a VC, a lot of the Filipino founders are Americanized, so they speak fluent English. And because they understand English, they are very clued into the Silicon Valley playbook in terms of they watch the YouTube videos, they read Lean Startup and all the books, which in Indonesia, if you don't have that familiarity with English, it makes it harder to access some of those training materials. And also, I think the second part is, of course, that when you have English fluency, you also have the ability to be interoperable, right? And be able to, And so there's so many Filipinos who have already worked at Apple, who have already
exactly.
worked in Samsung or Intel. So they already
Or Google.
or Google as
Yeah.
well. There's so many that go to Bay Area. There's so many Filipino
Right.
Americans there. So it's always a bit of a struggle because it's always like Indonesia always has a bit of, we don't have the talent because they're not being trained anywhere else. So everybody has to go through the local startup ecosystem to get that technology experience.
Yeah.
But I feel like there's so many Filipinos who have big experience.
Exactly.
And so it doesn't, I don't know why it doesn't like gel or click together in the Philippines. Yeah.
I guess it's the thing about the Philippine market is that it's cheap. Labor is cheap. So the income differential or the salary differential is quite huge. And that drives away some of the tech competent workforce. A lot of them went to Singapore, or a lot of them work in the Philippines for Singaporean companies.
Right.
So there's that. There's still a problem of supply, but you're right. It seems like they're already equipped to create startups or to work for startups in the Philippines. Yeah. But I think that's the primary reason. However, that this whole layoff phenomenon that's happening seems to be an opportunity for talent to start thinking about setting up their own companies and maybe fire or spark up another boom of new startups that we've seen we saw in about 2009 maybe.
Having lunch with some Filipino founders, and a lot of them were actually worried about AI, right? So they felt like AI is a good way to disrupt call centers, right? Because of the human voice and personality. They also do a good job automating and be a replacement for BPO, right? Workflow automation. And then another aspect, of course, is they're worried that for a lot of folks who are remote workers in the Philippines doing various like low-level or technical jobs, a lot of that could be replaced by automation or AI. Do you share those same concerns, or how?
Oh yeah, I mean, futurist, accelerationist. Yeah. But it's just gonna come. There's that whole thing about slowing down tech progress. It's a pipe dream. You can never stop that progress, right? It's gonna hit there. So we just have to prepare for that eventuality. I know there are people that are in denial. There's some people that are already trying to put things together in preparation for that and trying to identify which verticals we should start focusing on so that we survive. That's pretty much it. It's survival in the face of this new wave of AI. And from the looks of it, it's not a matter of years. It's a matter of maybe a couple of months, 18, 24 months, because you've seen how things have evolved. The problem with the Philippines is that it's a service-oriented market. We are good at call centers, business process outsourcing, etc. And these are the ones that are easily replaced by AI, as we've seen already. So the trick is to try to tap into that competency for services and try to create the tools that will replace the ones that are in lieu of what should be coming in. Create them ourselves as local IP. And then make that our value proposition. And some people are thinking about doing it that way. And however, it's really going to be painful. It's going to be painful. It's going to before we actually get in a groove, for sure. But for me, as a technologist and a coder as well, I'm less scared because I'm a builder. Right. I'm a creator, and I can tap into the existing layer of AI tools to create new things. Right. But on the grander scheme of things, on a larger scale, it's exactly the threat of the BPO market is concerning.
Yeah, and what's interesting is actually I've met also other Filipino founders whose entire startup is to automate away the BPO. Right. So they are the disruptors going after the local incumbents from their perspective. So it's been quite interesting to see that. And I know you've been fostering many founders at IdeaSpace. Could you share a little bit more about what IdeaSpace is? And I know it's a little bit also is a different role function that you've done in the past as well. Because in the past you're a coder, you've been a builder.
Founder, IdeaSpace was founded in 2013, around the same time that we started that wave of ecosystem building. And it was formed by the Metro Pacific Group and MVP Group. It was, the tycoon Manny Pangilinan. He had this group of companies that he had interest in. And I wasn't with them yet, but they envisioned IdeaSpace to be, number one, an enabler and an investor as well. So they built that out. They started investing in companies up to a certain point in time, in which they were giving away the money as grants. But in 2020, we started seriously investing again, proper investing for equity. And then now we have about 35 startups that are active until maybe Q4, when we made our last investment. Kubo is a public-private partnership with the government that was formed around 2016 with IdeaSpace and the Department of Science and Technology, DTI, etc. And then the idea was to create a hub which would enable the community to provide the capacity building, education, content, a space for people to build stuff. And it evolved over time to a programs and consulting operation that was doing work with the government to help innovation in the grassroots in the rest of the country, doing programs for international development agencies, United Nations, the US Embassy, and then lately the private sector as well. We've been tapped to do internal innovation programs, internal acceleration, hackathons, etc. So it's evolved into a consulting firm. And that's pretty much what it is now. Kubo is doing programs and consulting, and IdeaSpace Ventures is doing the serious investing. So this has happened over the last 10 months since I joined. And it's pretty much in a shape where we can do some serious investing in 2025 and expanding our reach for Kubo at the same time.
And how's that role shift been for you? Because I know you've been a founder, a builder, and this role is a little bit more, I wouldn't say a fund manager, ecosystem builder, and of course there's that investment arm as well. So how does that role shift been for you?
First of all, the ecosystem building comes naturally. I've been doing that since 2009. So it's not much of a change, except that now you've got a lot of the market's much more ready. You've got a team that's top notch and experts in the field. On the investment side, it's probably new, but not really, because I've been in the startup ecosystem for quite some time to know the nuances of VC and investing and all that. And it's evolved as well over time. As it's evolved, we're all learning together on the new ways of investing, the different types of instruments, the different types of focus on vertical strategies, etc. It's not a big deal. What has changed, though, I think not for me, but for the dynamic of IdeaSpace, is that I'm the first one that's that's actually come from the founder side of things. So when I deal with the cohorts of the accelerator, by the way, we run an accelerator called every year. So we just finished cohort 12. So when I deal with the accelerator cohorts, when I deal with the portfolio or even the community, I have that founder personality that I can tap into and point of view. And a lot of people have appreciated that. That's, I think, what's changed now. And I don't know if I've mentioned this, but cohort 12, which is the most recent cohort, is the first one that we invested in all of the startups. We took in 5, which means we had to vet them much more stricter. And we tried to spot the ones that are already post-revenue, have a better path towards exponential growth and all that, so that it's easier for us. The effort and energy we pour into that cohort has a higher chance of success and impact. So that's what's changed also in the accelerator side, which makes us much more serious now, right? It's not just ecosystem building or enabling startups, giving them a chance, but no, this one, we really want to see them succeed.
And what's interesting is that there are different clusters, I think, that Filipino startups seem to have converged on a little bit more. So I think in the past, a lot of the startups were very much, hey, this worked for America, I don't know, Facebook, right? So Facebook for Philippines. So there's a lot of, I would say, inspired, copy, localized kind of dynamics. But now I think we're starting to see a lot more local businesses come into And so I think we were having just a fun conversation over dinner last night about there seems to be a big trend of we were saying like is it small cap private equity, is it local businesses that are selling goods and services in the Philippines but it's tech enabled. How do you describe this cluster of startups that are going after this local economy?
I guess it's the effect of the lockdown, the pandemic.
Yeah.
Because hyperlocal became a thing. And the thing about the Philippine experience is that the lockdown forced everybody to level up their digital wallet game. Everybody started using e-wallets. No one was using cash anymore. The merchants from blue collar all the way to mature merchants started accepting cash, digital payments.
Yeah.
The convenience and the confidence in it was much more amplified, and I think that created a market that's much more digitally savvy. And couple that with the hyperlocal phenomenon, because we were all clustered up in our own little locales and we had to buy food from this homo, this neighbor or whatever. So like create that dynamic, including the cloud kitchen phenomenon, right? So that's the I think that's what happened. That's fueled that type of activity.
Yeah.
And you have to also remember that the first go-to was fintech. Everybody thought that fintech was the play for the Philippines because of our diaspora. The remittance, we're number 2 in the world, I think, or number 3 in the world as far as remittance is concerned. And everybody wanted to capture a piece of that. If that was then, what's now? I'm seeing, it may be just in the last couple of months, but I'm seeing startups that are solving real problems. Even some using AI that look legit, the way they're using it to solve these problems, instead of just how do you call this, a container for ChatGPT or UI container for ChatGPT. No, these are real AI applications that seem to be poised to solve big problems.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that there's a debate in venture capital, right? Which is, are these companies VC fundable? And now we're saying, is it going to create $1 billion outcome on the US stock exchange? And I think there's a big debate now. Okay, maybe it's a smaller company that gets acquired by a local conglomerate, or maybe it's a medium-sized company that goes for a local listing on the Filipino stock exchange. Is there that debate that's happening across the founders?
Oh yeah, well, not exactly a debate, but it's just playing out. And we know that the current climate is not very friendly for fundraising, much so the ambition to be a unicorn. I think the current crop of startups are much more, the ones that have survived in the past 2 years, are much more focused on being fundamentally strong, better business models, trying to survive without funding because funding has dried up. So that we currently have a crop of startups that have some kind of strength in them and resilience. And any activity coming from the VC space right now is really going into follow-on funding for their existing portfolio, or maybe investing in safe verticals. Like fintech is safe now because you have mature fintech companies and you just pour them into the ones that have a good traction and good high volume of actions. And then I don't know if you've seen this, but a lot of the funds are actually prematurely terminating or liquidating. And I see that as a reboot. When they really want to participate in going back to the ground floor so that they get back the multiples that they used to enjoy in the past couple of years. So that's something that I see. The Philippines, though, has more early stage startups than mature ones. And that's a very healthy market for opportunists who want to get into the ground floor. And we always say this, we're anticipating the inflection point of the economy. We have a young demographic. We have a very fast and growing economy. We have a fast growing digital economy. We're digitally savvy. So everybody's looking at the position of our market to be right at the bottom, just the perfect time for it to climb. Anyone that wants to experience that old multiple profits will be smart to come in now. But even better than maybe 3 years or 5 years ago.
And I think one interesting aspect that's interacting here, of course, is that we talked about migration, diaspora, and there's still people who are migrating out of Philippines and people who are moving back to the Philippines. So obviously, I think now we have these founders. I think it's a path for people who are ambitious and young and talented to be able to build their own career in the Philippines. I'm just curious whether you see that continuing to interact. I was listening to somebody pitch country migration service, and I was thinking to myself, wow, this is like a brain drain as a service.
Yeah. I was saying, okay, I don't think that's a good message to talk about here at this conference.
But so I guess we're both thinking the same thing, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, but there's that piece, right, which is if you are ambitious and hungry, you could leave the Philippines because you speak English.
Yeah.
Some people want nurses, they want coders, they want founders. What do you think about that?
If it's, for example, that country, it's not a big country.
Yeah.
So they probably will employ a small percentage of the workforce. But I'd see that as an opportunity to learn. Learn there, come back here. Hopefully they come back here. And we still have a supply problem for talent that's in the middle management, top management level. We do have a lot of engineers, designers, etc. But the product managers, the C-level, where we need people that are familiar with the tech startup space, who are willing to take equity as salary, that type of thinking, much more flexible to come back or to power ecosystem. So hopefully that they'd produce those types of people and that they can send back here. That's the optimistic view, of course. But at the end of the day, it's really an issue. The brain drain issue is very real, especially since our salary scale remains as such. It has to be solved on the fundamental level rather than us trying as hard as possible to attract them back home. And
I think it's a fundamental reality, right? Like you said, the GDP per capita, the cost of labor is 10 times higher in America than the Philippines. So if you just take a flight over, you get paid 10 times more for the same job. So I think that's a natural part. But I like what you said, is that I think it's a natural flow, and we just maneuver and harness it as you can. On that note, could you share about a time that let me just check the time here, sorry. To resume in 3, 2, 1. So on that note, could you share about a time that you personally have been brave?
When I started Airborne Access in 2002, that was the same year that I started a family. I had a daughter. It was a young family. Like I said, I'm not sure if you call it brave or just being naive or just being stubborn and overconfident, but I started a startup and the family at the same time. So other people would really be daunted by that combination, but it never really occurred to me. I'm sure my wife was scared, but I was really confident that this was I couldn't work anywhere else. So I couldn't get a job. It wouldn't work. I just had to build something. And or else I wouldn't be happy. So I just pursued it, persevered, and everything worked out. And the nice thing about it is that experience also created the entrepreneurial DNA in my family. So my daughter's also has the same mindset. They're not your typical corporate employee. She's more in design. My wife started a startup around an early cloud kitchen, an early version. She actually went to Magic in Indonesia, in Malaysia. She was rubbed off, and now they understand also the way that I think. They don't challenge it. They know it's part and parcel of our family dynamic too.
Yeah, amazing. I think a lot of founders always have that piece, right? Which is, hey, if I have set up a family, I'm not going to be able to be focusing on my company. Or if I have a company, I better not have a family. So it always feels like a sacrifice or trade-off. Right. Do you have any advice for folks who are like weighing that?
Ironically, my advice for the young kids out there who want to be founders is to do it now. While you don't have any other obligation. While you're living with your parents, you don't have any cash obligation to pay bills and rent. Do it now. And that's the window, that advantage that you have to start experimenting and learning as well. Who knows, you might hit it big. So that's a typical advice that I give. Start early and start when you don't have financial, baggage.
Yeah. And when you think about going from point A to point B to point C, any advice that you will give to your younger self?
Okay. Maybe it's unfair because there's so much that now, especially the methodologies like Lean Startup and all that. Of course, you want to teach yourself that, your younger self that, right? But it's really to continue doing things. but be much more open to feedback. That's the still be brave, still be number one, always be irreverent. That's a quality that I always respect, because you have zero respect for the status quo because you want to create something new. But be open to feedback, be open to wisdom that other people have actually experienced and want to share with you. That's very key. That saves you a lot of time and headache.
Yeah.
Heartbreak.
Any examples of advice you should have taken?
Let me see. It's for example, my go-to-market strategies. Nothing specific comes to mind, but go-to-market strategies, you always have this preconceived notion of how things will happen. And the worst thing you can predict is human behavior. And I'm a big believer in the randomness of, or even the contrarian ways that the people behave given a certain set of variables and stimuli. But yeah, don't overestimate your ability to predict the market. It's chances are you're gonna, and it's gonna be wrong all the time. Chances are it's gonna be wrong all the time. So try not to be too confident in building your product to serve a market that you've imagined will happen. Yeah. Validate early, obviously.
Yeah. On that note, thank you so much for sharing. I'd like to summarize the 3 big lessons I got from this. First of all, thanks so much for sharing about your early career, about what's it like building hardware and something, whoa, here's a computer, and using that as a way to build out your technical skills, to be a coder, to be a founder. So fantastic to hear that. Secondly, thanks so much for sharing about the Philippines as a market. I thought it was fascinating to contrast that, for example, versus Indonesia and Vietnam as the hot Southeast Asian markets, and compare and contrasting, for example, language fluency, GDP per capita, diaspora, technology industry hubs, and talk about what has happened in the past versus what could happen in the future. Lastly, thanks so much for sharing about your own personal experiences, the lessons you've learned along the way in terms of how you apply those lessons as a founder and now as an ecosystem builder that's handling both investments and acceleration. So fascinating to see how you build the future of the Philippines ecosystem. On that note, thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks so much. My pleasure.